This story begins with pineapples and ends with the deaths of 10 people. But for now, let's stick with the pineapples. The year is 1877. James Drummond Dole is born to Charles Fletcher Dole and Frances Drummond in Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts. Quiet beginnings, sure, but things were already in motion. A bookish kid, Unitarian upbringing, all that good stuff. But none of that really matters once he gets his hands on $16,240 US. With that money and a dream, he boards a ship and lands in Honolulu on November 16, 1899. No one knows it yet, but the pineapple is about to have a main character. He buys 64 acres in Wahiowa. Starts small, planting, harvesting, and selling. Then a cannery goes up, then a packing plant. By 1907, he's building an even bigger operation near Honolulu Harbor, and it's clear he's not here to play around. Magazine ads follow. The man is branding pineapples. He's turning fruit into an empire. Then 1913 hits, and with it, the Genica machine. Peeling and coring 35 pineapples a minute. Just like that, the era of soft, fallible human labor begins to end. He doesn't look back. Steel doesn't call in sick. Steel doesn't tire. Dole scales up, and soon, he's not just the face of Hawaiian pineapple. He is Hawaiian pineapple. By the 1920s, his company is producing over 75% of the world's pineapple supply. Other companies scramble to catch up, but it's already too late. Dole isn't following the pineapple boom. He is the pineapple boom. Now, fast forward to 1927, and a certain Charles Lindbergh has just flown his way from being a forgettable airmail pilot to being the first man to make a transatlantic plane trip. Seeing the world change from its cushy private island into Pacific, Dole came up with an idea. What if I can advertise the abilities of air shipping, thereby squeezing my competitors out of existence and making aviation history at the same time? So, on May 25th, 1927, Dole would announce that he would give $25,000 to whoever was the first to travel from Los Angeles, California to Honolulu, Hawaii, without any stops. Answering the call would be 24 pilots and navigators manning 18 planes. To have a clean takeoff, the racers would draw lots to decide the order in which they would take off. Bennett Griffin, an Oklahoman and a colonel in the U.S. Army during the Great War. Afterwards, he worked for Nebraska Aircraft Corporation and then moved to Oklahoma City and operated a small commercial air transport business and a flight school. For the race, he decided to use a Travel Air 5000 named Oklahoma. He was slated to start first. Norman Goddard, a native of England and Canada, he was a captain in the Canadian Air Service. He and his wife ran an airfield near San Diego. When he heard the news about the race, they had built a custom plane, El Encanto, purpose-made to be small and fast. Goddard insisted the HBH letters painted on the rudder stood for Hell-Bent for Hawaii. He enlisted the help of navigator Lieutenant Colonel K.C. Hawkins. He was an active-duty naval officer from San Diego Naval Air Station, who was on special leave to participate in the race. Together, they were slated to start second. Charles Parkhurst, another World War I veteran, he would fly his Air King biplane, the city of Peoria, from his home state of Illinois to California, though it was painted over before the start of the race because officially he was entered as Air King. He was slated to start third. Augie Pedlar, an oil worker and Montanan turned Californian, he enlisted the help of two aviators, Gillis Knopp, a Navy captain stationed at Stevens Point, Wisconsin, who was nicknamed Lucky Bag and would serve as the navigator, and more famously, Pedlar's co-pilot, Mildred Doran, a Canadian teacher turned aviator after watching an air show. Seeing that she was the only female pilot, the media loved her. She used this attention to advocate for having more women in aviation. She thought that a woman should fly just as easily as a man. Women certainly have the courage and tenacity required for long flights. They would name their Dole Air sedan after her and were slated to start fourth. William P. Irwin was a Great War flying ace. He scored 8 kills in France and earned himself the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Distinguished Service Cross, as well as the French Croix de Guerre. Using his good name, he would fly a custom-built monoplane called the Dallas Spirit. He and his wife Constance planned to use the Dallas race as merely the first leg in a longer voyage to Hong Kong. However, Constance was too young and was also pregnant, so she was ultimately replaced by Alvin Eichwald. Together, they were slated to start 5th. Frederick A. Giles, a native Brit born in London, he was an RAF veteran living in Detroit. As a solo pilot, he entered his Hess H-2 Bluebird biplane named Wanda into the race. Electing to fly without a navigator, he was slated to start 6th. Major Livingston Irving served in World War I as a first lieutenant for the Army Air Service. Stationed in the 103rd Aero Squadron and the 3rd Pursuit Group for the American Expeditionary Forces in France, he claimed an aerial victory in 1918. Diving into a formation of 11 planes, he came out alive, destroying one plane and forcing another to land. For this, he earned a Distinguished Service Cross from the President. He would be flying his Brees Wild Model 5, named the Pobco Flyer, a high-wing monoplane, and was also slated to start in 7th. Robert C. Fowler hailed from San Francisco and was adamant in participating in the race, even though he didn't have a plane. He was slated to start 10th. Martin Jensen, the only contestant from Hawaii, was very popular with the media. Friends in Hawaii helped him pay for an F-18 air coach he cheekily named Aloha. A grateful Jensen had painted a giant lei completely around the plane's nose, and the Hawaii state seal on both sides. His navigator was Paul Shuttler, whom he recruited in the Bay Area. He even completed the look by having hula dancers accompany the plane. He was slated to start 11th. Frank L. Clark was already quite the star. He was a Hollywood stunt pilot, actor, and military officer. He moved to Venice, the one in California, not in Italy, and learned to fly as a stunt pilot. One of his famous antics was a mid-air transfer from one plane to another, standing on top of the plane and grabbing the landing gear of another. His first piloting job was in 1925 for the film The Cloud Rider, and his Hollywood career only kicked off more after that. Hailing from Hollywood, his plane was an F-18 Air Coach 912, the Miss Hollydale, and was slated to start 12th. George D. Covell was a Navy lieutenant, nicknamed Turkey, and was stationed in Tacoma, Washington when he heard the news of the race. He, along with his friend Richard S. Wagner, entered the race with a Pacific Aircraft Company J-30 they called the Tremaine Hummingbird, so they renamed her the Spirit of John Rogers. They were also friends with Davis, Goebel's navigator, and were slated to start in 13th. Going from Los Angeles, the Angel of Los Angeles was to be piloted by the decorated veteran of the Lafayette Escadrille in World War I, Captain Arthur Vickers Rogers. Rogers, who was born in Liverpool, would pilot the Bryant X-705. That would be navigated by Leland A. Bryant, who, in fact, designed the plane himself, hence the name. The Bryant X-705 Angel of Los Angeles was slated to start in 14th. From San Francisco, John W. Frost and Gordon Scott flew in a Lockheed Vega. The plane was notorious. It was a plane behind the multiple record-setting pilots, including Amelia Earhart's solo flight across the Atlantic Ocean. It was designed by John Knutson Northrop and Gerald Voltee, both of whom went on to create their own aviation companies. The Golden Eagle, as they named it, was slated to start in 15th, and last. Now that the race was set, the only thing left to do was to get everyone to Oakland to start the race. Contestants were to present the aircrafts and their respective pilots by August 8th in San Francisco, so that the National Aeronautics Association could check their certificates and licenses as a final qualification. And so, the contestants make their way to the Golden City, though not without some problems here or there. On August 5th, Giles and his plane Wanda are reporting to have engine issues in their home base of Detroit, and multiple planes were forced to land prematurely due to heavy fog surrounding the Bay Area. The Popco Flyer even had to land in a cow pasture. The fog proved to be more than just a nuisance, as the Spirit of John Rogers was flying out of San Diego after being grounded by the aforementioned fog, only to crash into a cliff that they could not see due to said fog. Through their deaths, George Covell and Richard Wagner would be the first people to be eliminated from the race. I guess they were right when they said turkeys can't fly. Shortly after, the two would be followed in elimination by Richard Fowler, who still didn't have a plane and decided to give up, as well as by Frank L. Clark in the Miss Hollydale, who decided he didn't want to race anymore and withdrew on August 10th. He then announced he would attempt the world endurance record instead and took off abruptly on August 13th. The rest of the planes made it to San Francisco without a hitch, but the problems would not end there. On August 11th, the Pride of Los Angeles is trying to land in Oakland. It tried to land, failed, and crashed into the San Francisco Bay. J.L. Griffin and Theodore Lundgren were officially out of the race. Seeing that the Derby just lost 4 racers in 3 days, the commission decides to postpone the race by a couple of weeks to let everyone get their shit in order. They decided that in order to see if these planes could make it to Hawaii in one piece, they would conduct a test, with the pass-by being August 15th. They wanted to ensure that they wouldn't lose any more racers. Arthur Rogers, however, had other ideas, and he would take the Angel of Los Angeles for a test flight when the plane started acting quote-unquote queer. He jumped out of the plane and it crashed on August 13th. Yet another racer out of the race. The tension was building as the remaining contestants scrambled to get their planes and their crews to a passable state. The first to qualify would be El Encanto on August 12th, followed by the Golden Eagle, Popco Flyer, and Oklahoma on the same day. The following day, the Miss Doran and her crew would be the last to qualify. The remaining 2 pilots would be eliminated. Packhurst with the Air King for not having enough fuel storage, and Fred Giles because he was still in Detroit. By the time the clock struck midnight on August 15th, 8 of the 15 pilots had managed to get to the starting line for James Dole's Great Air Race on August 16th, 1927.
Finally, after multiple mishaps and a postponement of the race, everyone was in Oakland, or everyone who remained, and the race was ready to begin. The crowd had waited long enough. At the time of takeoff, estimates of the size of the crowd count 75 to 100,000 people. The masses were ready. This was not about to be interrupted again, except for the fact that it was. A fog bank covered the horizon, starting from the Golden Gate Bridge and covering the entire route. Eventually, it lifted over the airport at 10:40 a.m. When the pilots did receive the all-clear to take off, it was just before noon. So here we go. 12 p.m. sharp, the first plane's engine sputters on the runway and revs to life. The propeller starts to spin, it heads down the runway, and it takes off without a hitch. So, the Oklahoma was the first to fly. The crowd roars to life 2 minutes later as the next plane gets ready, the El Encanto. The engine sputters on the runway and revs to life. The propeller starts to spin, it heads down the runway, and it immediately crashes, swerving and smashing its port wing before ever getting off the ground. In what has now become a trademark of this race, from here on out everything starts to go spectacularly wrong. 12:09. The Popco Flyer lines up to the runway. The engine sputters on the runway, blah blah blah, and it takes off without a hitch, until it also crashes into a marshland around 7,000 feet from the runway. And the crowd, by this point, is no longer roaring to life, and is instead silently contemplating what decisions were made that led them to a field to watch planes explode. It would be quite some time before the next takeoff. The Golden Eagle lined up at 12:30. This time, it took off smoothly and flew off into the distance. It was followed up by the Miss Doran, 12:31, Aloha, 12:33, Woolaroc, 12:34, and the Dallas Spirit, 12:36. In a rare turn of events, there was no rare turn of events. The last 5 planes took off without a hitch. Unfortunately, we are still narrating the same race. So about 10 minutes after taking off, the catastrophe resumes at 12:43, when Miss Doran returns to the airstrip with its engine, quote-unquote, sputtering like a Tin Lizzie. At 1 p.m., the Popco Flyer, clearly not having learned its lesson the first time, lined back up to the runway, started its engine, took off, and immediately crashed, disqualifying itself for good. At 1:08, the Oklahoma and the Dallas Spirit both ended up back on the airstrip, the Oklahoma having ripped the fabric covering the fuselage, and the Dallas Spirit having issues with its tail gear. In technical terms, it couldn't get it up, and neither of them ended up taking off again. Miss Doran, however, would not be so quick to give up over something so minor as a technical issue jeopardizing the well-being and safety of the entire crew. Mildred was quite prepared for this. In a letter to her friend in Flint, Michigan, she said, "Our plane is the favored one. We are sure going to be the first there." And on the day of the race, she did not step down. Quote unquote, "Last words? I haven't had any but goodbye and I love you. Afraid? Of course not. I'm happy and ready to go." After the engine sputtered like a Tin Lizzie, she didn't seem too happy or ready to go. Accounts say her face was white and she wasn't smiling. But she ended up in the plane anyway, and so at 2:03, Miss Doran takes off again. The next day is just as catastrophic as the first. To refresh your memory, the 4 planes currently in the air are the Woolaroc, the Aloha, the Miss Doran, and the Golden Eagle. Around 2 in the morning, we receive our first piece of good news since yesterday's disastrous start. The SS Manulani, the last of 4 ships placed along the 2,400-mile route to receive pilot updates, relays a message that the Woolaroc and possibly the Miss Doran were halfway to Hawaii. You'd expect something ridiculous to happen to the Woolaroc now that it's been mentioned at all, as has been the pattern since the start of this race, but no. At 10 a.m., the Woolaroc radios Wahiawa radio station in Wheeler Field to give our dear spectators back home a status update. It lives! The Woolaroc is currently 200 miles out. An hour later, it's escorted by a Boeing PW-9 sent from Wheeler Field through the final stretch in Hawaii, and uncharacteristically and unbelievably without incident, lands at 12:15 p.m. in Wheeler Airfield, much to the delight of the 25,000 or so spectators who greeted them at touchdown in Hawaii. So, congratulations to our winners. Goebel and Davis won in 26 hours and 17 minutes, earning them a cash prize of $25,000. Frankly, it's peculiar how normal this run was, but despite what it might seem like, it was never supposed to be an adventure. You see, there was a string of boats that the planes were meant to follow via radio signals. All the planes had to do was follow the signals and they were supposed to land in Hawaii as easily as that. And that's exactly what the Woolaroc did. The Aloha did not. They flew much of the way at a low altitude of 10 to 50 feet, or 3 to 15.2 meters above sea level, helping their fuel economy but making it impossible to sight the stars for navigations. Every time they tried to climb above the clouds, they were sent into a tailspin. So, their only method of navigation was some good old math. Using landmarks they could see on the ground, they could calculate their speed and position to Hawaii. This technique is called dead reckoning, and it's still widely taught to navigators today. By 12:30 p.m., the Aloha calculated that they were close to Hawaii, and so they land 2 hours after the Woolaroc at 2:15 p.m., earning them a prize of $10,000. Being a benevolent and famously generous man, in return for risking his life over the open ocean, the pilot Jensen rewarded his navigator with the princely sum of $25. By this point, not 1 but 2 planes have reached Hawaii without incident. And by this point, you might also be remembering that I had promised that the next day would be quote-unquote just as catastrophic as the first. So where's the catastrophe? Allow me to pose another question to you that answers this one. Where are the Golden Eagle and Miss Doran?
As a matter of fact, they hadn't been seen for hours by the time the Aloha lands. The Golden Eagle was spotted halfway to Hawaii at 2 a.m. on August 17th by the SS City of Los Angeles, and the Miss Doran was spotted above the Farallon Islands at 2:43 p.m. on August 16th. By the time the afternoon of the 17th, people were starting to suspect that something was up. or more accurately, that something was down. At 7 p.m., the USS Langley and Aroostook departed from San Diego, as they had planned to just in case an emergency search was necessary. Their fears were only confirmed when two boys said they had seen an aircraft run out of fuel and glide down just 1.5 miles off the north shore of Oahu at 9 p.m. Everyone's fears but the crew of the Dallas Spirit. As multiple ships were joining the search to find the missing planes on the 18th, these two finally, in technical terms, got it up. They left at 2:20 p.m. on August 19th with no problems at takeoff. At 5:10 p.m., they passed the SS Manoa. Again, no problems. At 5:52 p.m., they passed a destroyer bound for Honolulu to join the search, with still no problems. Around 7 p.m., they reported changing course slightly to avoid clouds and maintain visibility. As the sky goes dark around 8 p.m., they realized something was up. They send an SOS at 9 p.m. saying that they went into a tailspin. Shockingly, the Dallas Spirit was not going to make it. The first to reach the point of last transmission of the Dallas Spirit was the USS Hazelwood, 3 hours after their SOS. No wreckage was found. Now there were 3 planes and 7 people to find. Dole had put up a $10,000 reward for anyone who found either plane. This was matched by each plane's sponsors for an additional total of $20,000 reward for each aircraft, even though the Navy sent out a total of 54 ships to join the search. No concrete leads were found. The search officially ended on August 24th, but the fake reports and hoaxes would prevail all the way into 1930. Finally, putting an end to the ill-fated Dole Air Race. After the race, Goebel placed first in the first transcontinental non-stop air derby from New York to Los Angeles on September 13, 1928. Eventually, he would finally settle down and found an air school in Los Angeles, as well as serving as an Army Air Corps Reserve pilot during World War II. He rose to the rank of colonel and died on December 3, 1973, in Los Angeles, California. William Davis would go on to rise in the ranks of the U.S. Navy, eventually Chief of Staff of Commander Aircraft of the Central Pacific Force during World War II. He was awarded the Legion of Merit Cross and also made a Vice Admiral, a position he would hold throughout the Cold War and until his death on July 25, 1981, in Mobile, Alabama.
Martin Jensen's post-race life was somehow more interesting than his time in the race. On September 1st, deciding he hadn't tempted fate enough, he returned to San Pedro and immediately set off on another non-stop flight, this time from Los Angeles to New York. And because that wasn't enough, he brought along Leo, a Metro Goldwyn-Mayer studio line. Unsurprisingly, this didn't go well. After feeding Leo some pre-flight raw steaks, they went on to crash into an Arizona mountain in heavy fog. The most outrageous part? Jensen survived unhurt, and Leo was trucked to New York. Jensen later founded the Jensen Aircraft Corporation, lost it in the 1929 crash, and eventually settled down, spending the rest of his life researching aviation, free of plane crashes, market crashes, and mascot lions. He died in 1992, as undeniably the most intriguing survivor of the Dole Air Race.
And of course, James Dole, the whole reason why this race happened, would go on to be removed from management of the Pineapple Titan he founded in 1932, mostly because the net return ratio of pineapples was heavily impacted by Dole's overproduction of said fruit, as well as a certain Great Depression, though the contemporary public image the race left did not help either. He retired in 1948, living peacefully in his house in Wahiawa, Hawaii, until a heart attack finally took his life on May 20th, 1958.
And just like that, the Dole Air Race and its legacy is over. Many of the racers didn't make it. Those who did walked away with some prize money, mild fame in the form of a video essay a full century after the race, and in one case, a lion. But stepping back and remembering those who participated in this outrageous catastrophe, it really sticks, because it was crazy. And you start to think, what the hell made them do it? What made them participate in this ridiculous stunt? And in respect to one crew especially, what made them try to take off again after they crashed on the runway the first time? Was the first time not enough for you? Maybe it's blind optimism, the type of optimism that makes you try to fly 2,400 miles to Hawaii even after you've proven you can barely make it off the runway. Maybe it's confidence. Remember, one of the final letters sent by Mildred, the woman in the Miss Doran, said, "Our plane is the favored one. We are sure going to be the first there." Didn't age well. But maybe it's something deeper. There's a human instinct to be the first to do something, to take one step further than the person before you, or in this case, fly 1 mile further. It's the human instinct to be remembered, the human drive to be immortalized in a short-form video essay by a channel with 100 subscribers and a very large amount of free time. We've seen this countless times in history. It's what drives us, what keeps humanity innovating. And this wasn't even close to the last aerial stunt humanity has pulled. We've literally been to the moon. We continue to innovate with this drive, this instinct, and it takes us places. Sometimes it takes us to Hawaii, sometimes it takes us to the moon, and sometimes it takes us straight into the Pacific Ocean. But it takes us places. The Dole Air Race was objectively an absolute disaster from start to finish, but it was also a cornerstone of human innovation. It was reckless, but it was new. And that's what the human instinct to be first is all about. It was bold, it was human, and that's why, 100 years later, we're still talking about it.